Some matches are played on grass, some are played in history, and some, only a handful in the entire arc of human civilization, are played in the open wound of a nation that hasn't finished bleeding. This is one of those matches. April 1982, the Argentine military government made a decision that would scar a generation. They sent their young men, boys, many of them, to a chain of windswept islands in the South Atlantic, and islands they called Las Malvinas, islands the British called the Falklands. The reasons were political, the consequences were deeply, irreversibly human. In 74 days of conflict, more than 900 men died, British and Argentine alike, young men who had been given a map and told to stand on it. Argentina surrendered in June. The military government that had launched the war collapsed shortly after, brought down in part by the weight of what they had done. But collapse doesn't equal healing. The Argentine people had lost the war, lost the islands, lost the boys they had sent across the cold southern sea, and lost something harder to name, a sense of themselves in the world, a quiet dignity that no peace agreement could restore. The wound didn't close. It didn't close in 1983 or in 1984 or in 1985. It simply waited the way wounds do for the moment when something or someone would finally arrive to say what the courtrooms and the politicians couldn't say. And slowly, across those long years of silence, one name began to be spoken with increasing intensity on every street corner, in every cafe, in every barbershop, from Buenos Aires to Cordoba. His name was Diego. Diego Armando Maradona was born in October 1960 in one of the poorest neighborhoods on the outskirts of Buenos Aires. He was the fifth of 8 children. He grew up in the dust, in the heat, in the particular genius of children who have nothing but a ball and the fierce, burning desire to make that ball do impossible things. From the earliest age, the ball listened to him in a way it listened to no one else. It moved with him like a second shadow, like something alive and obedient to his smallest intention. By 1986, Diego Maradona was the best footballer on the planet and perhaps the best who had ever lived. But in Argentina, by 1986, he was not merely a footballer, he was the bearer of a million prayers. He was the answer to a question a nation had been screaming into the South Atlantic fog for 4 years without anyone screaming back. The 22nd of June, 1986, Mexico City, Azteca Stadium. The opponents were England, not just England, the football nation, but England, the British Empire, the naval fleet that had sailed south 4 years earlier, the flag that now flew over Las Malvinas. Argentina's manager, Carlos Bilardo, prepared his team for a football match. But in the locker room that morning, in the unspoken language between men who shared the same wound, everyone understood that this was not just a quarterfinal. This was the day the war came to a football pitch. The match itself was tight, tense, and played at the edge of something unspoken. The first half passed in controlled aggression, 2 nations feeling each other out across a vivid green pitch under the brutal Mexican midday sun. The score stayed level. The second half began with the same suffocating tension, and then in the 51st minute, the world changed. A ball floated into the penalty area. Diego and England's goalkeeper, Peter Shilton, a full head taller than Diego, leapt for it simultaneously. What happened next was compressed into a single impossible moment, seen by everyone in the stadium, understood by everyone watching, yet confirmed by no one with the authority to undo it. Diego's left arm rose almost imperceptibly. The ball changed direction, the net moved, the referee's arm stayed down, the goal stood. In that split second, Diego Maradona performed something that has no clean name in any language, and it was not skill in the traditional sense. It was not pure accident. It was a trickster's move. The kind that street kids from Villa Fiorito learned before they learned to read. A ghostly, barely there touch, dressed in the clothes of instinct. A rebellious act committed in broad daylight with 115,000 witnesses and still somehow unseen by the only eyes that officially mattered. Peter Shilton screamed. The English players surrounded the referee with fury made visible in every gesture and expression. The referee had not seen it. No linesman had flagged. The goal stood. And in that refereeing silence, Argentina felt something complicated and enormous rise in their chests. It was a stolen moment, yes. But for a country that believed something far greater had been stolen from them 4 years earlier, 6,000 miles to the south, it felt in the most primal and unjust and deeply human way imaginable, like a single small accounting. Not justice. Nothing as clean and satisfying as justice, but something rawer than that. Something that only makes sense when you understand what it means to lose something you love and never receive an apology for it. And then, 4 minutes later, Diego Maradona did something that required no asterisk and no debate and no forgiveness from anyone. He received the ball just past the halfway line, in his own half, surrounded by white jerseys, with his back to England's goal. For one fraction of a second, he was still, perfectly still, reading everything in front of him. And then he turned and he began to move forward. The English defenders came at him one after another, and they fell away, like statues toppling in slow motion, each one reaching for him and finding only empty air where he had been. Diego moved through them like water, finding the spaces between stones, not fast in the mechanical sense that stopwatches measure, but inevitable, as if the path through those 5 defenders had been drawn before he began running it, and he was simply following something already written. He passed 1 defender, and then 2, then 3, each one grasping at something that was no longer there by the time their hands arrived. He cut inside a 4th, beat the goalkeeper with a movement so precise it looked composed rather than improvised, and rolled the ball with his left foot into the net. 60 yards, 5 defenders, 1 goalkeeper, 1 left foot, 1 nation holding its breath from 6,000 miles away. And it was not a goal in the way that other goals are goals. It was a symphony played on grass by a man who grew up in the dust. It was 60 yards of pure defiance composed in real time on a Mexican afternoon against a team that carried, whether they knew it or not, the weight of a different kind of contest entirely. Later, when journalists asked the English captain what it was like to be on the pitch when that second goal was scored, he paused for a long time before answering. Then he said, simply and honestly, that even then, even at that moment, you just had to admire it. Argentina won 2-1 that day. They would go on to win the World Cup itself, beating West Germany in the final 7 days later. But ask any Argentine who lived through 1986 which moment defined that tournament, which moment they carry in their body to this day, and they will not mention the final. They will close their eyes and go back to the 22nd of June and the 55th minute, and the sound the stadium made, and what it felt like, for just a moment, to be whole again. Buenos Aires that night was a different city than it had been that morning. The same streets, the same buildings, but the color had returned to everything. Something that had been held tight inside an entire people for 4 years had been released into the warm June air. Strangers embraced on street corners, and old men wept without embarrassment. Children sat on their father's shoulders, watching the adults feel something enormous and not fully understanding what it was, only knowing that it mattered more than anything they had ever seen. Years later, decades later, Diego was asked what beating England had meant to him personally, and he thought about it the way he always thought about serious questions, with his whole face and not just his eyes. And he said that it felt like reclaiming something that had been taken, not the islands. He was careful to say that a football match cannot return what was lost on those frozen cliffs. Nothing can do that. But for 90 minutes. And especially for those 4 extraordinary minutes between the 51st and the 55th, Argentina had felt seen and heard and made in some primal and impossible way. Diego Maradona passed away in November 2020 in Buenos Aires that night. People gathered outside his childhood home in Villa Fiorito. They didn't chant, they didn't sing, they simply stood together in the dark and cried. Because some people are not merely athletes, some people carry the weight of their country's wounds on their short, extraordinary shoulders. And for one golden afternoon in Mexico, in the brutal heat of a June that nobody who was there will ever forget, one man ran 60 yards through the heart of history and made an entire nation feel like it could breathe again. World Cup tales, every legend begins somewhere.